Hi, and welcome to my reading journal. This is just kind of a video series I'm going to do to keep track of what I read and to hold myself accountable for actually reading things. I was snowed in a lot this month, so I feel like I got a lot more done than I probably will in future months, but we will... So far it's going well. The first book I read was The Black Prince of Florence by Catherine Fletcher. It's about Alessandro de' Medici, who was the Duke of Florence and was, as you can see, mixed race. I think Catherine Fletcher did a really good job trying to fairly portray his life. And it's just a really interesting period as well, because I really like the kind of medieval and early Renaissance periods anyways. So the second book I read was The Accidental Further Adventures of the 100-Year-Old Man. So this is a sequel to The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out of a Window and Disappeared, which is a fantastic book. I have read everything that this author has written, and he is fantastic. Just everything he writes is brilliant. So I was really excited to find out that there was going to be a sequel to this. It did not disappoint. It's really, really good. I find with books, especially about like modern day events, that they can be kind of dismal and very pessimistic. But this book took current events and made them funny and almost optimistic. Anyways, it was just a really good follow-up. Yeet. Books are heavy, man. So the next book I read was The Diary of Mary Berg. It's written by a girl named Mary Berg who lived in the Warsaw Ghetto, and she just kind of chronicles her experiences living in the ghetto. This is probably one of the best memoirs of the Holocaust I've ever read. For me especially, it was kind of a call to action, because she's constantly just questioning, why aren't people doing anything? Why aren't people saying anything? They know what's happening to us. If you read just one other thing about the Holocaust besides Anne Frank's diary, read this book. So the next book I read, Border Crossings by Charles Novacek. It's about a boy who grows up in occupied Czechoslovakia and his kind of coming of age in the resistance, and then his further activities in the resistance against the Soviets. He details a lot of things that are more uncomfortable about generally resistance movements that it seems other books that I've read have shied away from in some way. So for example, he talks about techniques for withstanding torture. Yeah, but it's very, very moving. I have been looking at this book for a really long time. I finally got it, and I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty disappointed about it. So this is a fictionalized account of Leil Sokolov's experiences in Auschwitz. It seemed very fleetingly written. That's a weird turn of phrase. Let me explain. So the whole point of this is that one day, there's a new arrival in the camp, and he looks up and this girl is looking down at him, and he's tattooing her arm, and he thinks, I'm going to survive, I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to marry this girl. And he does. But that moment seemed very empty to me, and there seemed to be no real emotional impact. Because there seemed to be no emotional depth to it, I didn't feel the loss. That's me being picky, but as you can see, there was a theme in me reading a lot about the Holocaust this month. Don't read into that too much. This was not one of my favorites, but again, if you disagree with me, let me know. I needed a break from the Holocaust books. So I picked up The Bookshop of Yesterdays by Amy Meyerson. It is about a girl who was really close to her uncle growing up, and she loses touch with him because her uncle and her mother get into a very big fight, and she basically never sees her uncle again until he dies, and she goes home to find that he has left her his bookshop. It was a very good exploration of what family means and what love means, and whether family is just what we're born into or whether family is made through love and nurture and care and all that stuff. So it was really cute. It was really good. Prairie Fires was another one that I read this month. It's been getting promoted a lot, and I was worried it might be overhyped, but it definitely was not. If you're like me, I'm sure you read Little House on the Prairie, but I had no idea about any of the things that happened after Little House on the Prairie. Like, Laura Ingalls Wilder had a daughter who, some people knew this, I did not. When I walked into this, she only had one daughter, and daughter was wild, to say the least, and her struggles didn't end after the final book of Little House on the Prairie, which I'm sure everyone would figure out because, Little House on the Prairie was when she was little, so obviously she's going to go through some adult struggles, but generally this was just a really good read. It was really well written. I definitely do not see Laura Ingalls Wilder the same way after reading this book. It definitely is just one of the best biographies I've read. The next book I read, I do not actually have a copy of. I left it at my parents' house. So I read Walden Pond by Henry David Thoreau. It was a love letter to nature. I have recently been researching a lot about John Brown and Harper's Ferry Raid, which I'm sure if you're seeing my other videos, you know why. Henry David Thoreau was one of the people who actually defended the raid when others were too scared to defend the raid, so I wanted to read more about Thoreau and read some of his kind of classic essays. So in addition to Walden Pond, I also read his defense of John Brown and his plea for John Brown. Those were both, of course, very, very good, and he touches on a lot of issues that I think are still very, very relevant today. There's one point where he says, for all the work I have to do to get the meat, kill the animal and skin it and all this, cook it and stuff. He's like, at the end of the day, it's not even that filling. After doing all that work, it's not that filling. I'd rather have bread. I mean, I'd rather have bread too. Thanks. I don't know where I was going with that. Yikes. Next book I read was Gateway to Freedom by Eric Foner. This was a really good history of the Underground Railroad in New York City. I will say I was disappointed because this book was trying to portray the Underground Railroad by concentrating on a small area and then showing how it worked just in that small area. From my own research, it has seemed that the Midwest took more of a lead in conducting the Underground Railroad and helping slaves to freedom because a lot of the states in the Midwest were border states. So it was, say, easy for Iowans to help Missouri slaves across the border and into freedom. So I was disappointed that this focused on New York City because I feel like a lot of history focuses on New York City and bigger cities, whereas the Underground Railroad is one of those things that really did have a concentration in the Midwest. I mean, I grew up in Iowa. There are Underground Railroad houses everywhere. And the history of the Underground Railroad and abolitionism in the Midwest is very, very prevalent. So I was disappointed that it wasn't even mentioned in this book. But that's my inner Midwesterner getting mad that our one shining moment in history was completely ignored. Again, I have been seeing a lot about this book, so I decided to finally pick it up. It's about a murder trial that Abraham Lincoln tried just before he accepted the Republican Party's nomination to become the President of the United States of America. It was a really well-written book about the trial, but if you were looking for information or kind of historical background, you weren't going to find it in this book. It was a really good depiction of the trial, and it was very interesting to see what courts were like and how Abraham Lincoln practiced law before he became the president. That being said, I like the medieval period. There was one reference to the Magna Carta that they got wrong, and it just made me mad. It is still a really good depiction of how courts worked back in the 19th century. Ugh, it's cold. The final book I read this month was A Map of Days, which is the fourth novel in Miss Peregrine's Peculiar Children. I love this series. Not gonna lie, I thought that it was done after the third book, but it is not done, and oh my goodness. This book broke my heart, but it's really good. It's basically all of reading, isn't it? It explores America and the kind of peculiarity of American peculiardom. So that was fun. All right, so those are all the books I read this month. Some of my thoughts on them. If you read any of them or are starting to read them or have any thoughts to add, leave them down in the comments. So I have already started my February reading. It's still not the end of January, but it counts. About A Life of Beatrix Potter. And yes, I am using a train ticket as a bookmark because, like any good reader, I have many bookmarks and I don't use any of them. All right, bye.